This is Appalachian Television Omni Media, improving America. 308. Local Wasteland time. If you're listening, it means the night still has a way of finding you. Before the story, something simple. Outside the voice. I don't speak Spanish well. I can work with it. I can read enough to keep myself from getting lost. But if you hand me a feeling, if you hand me something delicate, I still don't always have the right words to carry it without dropping it. I kept trying anyway, because I started to realize the signal was doing its job, and I wasn't always doing mine. People were catching pieces, a phrase, a warning, a name, and the rest was slipping through like water through fingers. So I practiced. Not in a proud way. In the only way you can out here. With what the world left behind. And after enough of these broadcasts, somebody reached back. Not with footsteps. With static. Mexico City. He calls himself Xicohténcatl. We've spoken a handful of times. Never long. Never comfortable. More like two men sharing a match in bad weather, just to prove the other one isn't a mirage. He told me it's a wasteland down there, too. Different ruins, different prayers, same problems. Hunger, fear, love, loss, all wearing a different accent. Sometimes he passes me a story he's heard on his side, from caravans, from locals, from the one still moving between pockets. I pass it along the way I pass everything along, quietly and straight. Tonight's story comes from the Sonoran borderlands, a village built around an old stone fountain, and it refuses to dry up. They call the place Ojito, and the story is called the Coyote Choir. Xicohténcatl said you can smell a rad storm before you see it. The air gets metallic. The horizon turns the color of a healing bruise. Dust starts to move in little impatient circles, like something waking up. In El Ojito, they don't run when the storm comes. They close the doors. They pull cloth over mouths. They bring the animals in close. They wait for the red wind to finish its tantrum. And when it's over, when the sky peels back in the stars, they do something look strange to an outsider. They sweep the plaza. Not out of panic. Not like they're trying to erase evidence. Like they're preparing a room for someone important to arrive. The heart of El Ojito is a fountain. Old stone, chipped and pitted. A lion's face worn down so long, it barely looks like an animal anymore. It shouldn't still run. The pipes are pre-war. The pumps are dead. The grid is a memory. But the water keeps coming. Thin, steady, patient. Locals say it's fed by an underground vein. The bombs didn't bother to poison it all the way through. A stubborn little artery in the earth, still doing what it was made to do. On ordinary nights, the fountain is just water. But after a rad storm, for a few hours, it isn't. After a rad storm, the fountain glows. Not bright like a lantern, a low green shimmer, a quiet pulse. Just enough to make the surface look alive when the moon hits it. Just enough to make the plaza feel watched. And that's when they come. Sometimes after midnight, when the last of the storm's grit settles into cracks. A pack of coyotes steps out of the dark. Except Xicohténcatl said nobody in Ojito calls them coyotes. Not anymore. They call them chillotes, a word that started as a joke and ended up as a warning. They're larger than they should be. Longer in the leg, heavier in the shoulder. Their fur is darkened like it's been smoked, patched in places, with skin that looks tough and tired underneath. And their eyes. Their eyes don't shine the normal way. They glow like dying coals. Not aggressive, not sharp, just present. You see them and you understand two things at once. They've lived through things the coyotes weren't built to live through. And somehow, they're still here. The villagers don't raise rifles. They don't throw stones. They don't shout, they don't challenge, and they don't test. They stand back. Doors stay shut. Candles appear in windows. And the plaza goes quiet. The kind of quiet where you can hear your own blood and you start resenting it for being loud. The chillotes move like mourners, tails low, heads bowed, not sneaking, not hunting, approaching the fountain like it's an altar they didn't build, but agreed to respect. One by one, they drink from the glowing water. Deep pulls, long pauses. Then the next one steps forward. No fighting over position. No snapping. No asserting dominance. Xicohténcatl said that it didn't look like animals sharing a resource. It was like a line. Like something orderly survived inside them when everything else got burnt out. After they drink, they sing. Not barking. Not the ragged yipping you hear in the hills. They lift their heads, and a sound comes out that doesn't feel like howling. It's layered, a long, keening note, then another joining it, then another. 3 voices, 4, sometimes 5, weaving together in a way that makes your chest tighten before your mind can explain why. Xicohténcatl said the rhythm is what makes it unsettling, because it isn't random. It falls into patterns that echo old rancheras, the way a human hums a song he hasn't heard in years, and still hits the right shape of it. No words, no language, just the melody of something remembered. And when they do it, the whole village listens. Even the geckos go still, he said. Even the wind seems to stop fidgeting. They don't sing for long, a few minutes, sometimes less. Then, as if someone rang a bell only they can hear, they stop. They turn. They walk back into the dark the same way they came. Quiet, measured, like a ritual completed. And the plaza is left clean, moonlit, and still. No one in Ojito claims to understand it. They have theories, of course. People always do. Some believe the chillotes are guardians, that the rad water does something to them, makes them stronger, sharper, and that strength keeps something worse away. And it's hard to argue with the results. Xicohténcatl said raiders skirt the village, not because they've been shot at, because the desert gives them other options, and El Ojito doesn't feel like an easy mouthful. He said ferals don't approach either, not the drifting ones, not the packs that roam after storms, as if something in that plaza makes the dead decide just to keep walking. Other people tell a different story, a sadder one. They say the chillotes were once a family that lived outside the village in early days. A man, a woman, children. They kept goats, and they kept to themselves. They didn't want help. Then the first wave of fallout came through the valley, and nothing stayed clean. The family didn't die all at once, the story goes. They changed. And when they couldn't stay human the way they used to, they left their house and went into the desert because they didn't want to scare the village. They didn't want to be hunted. They didn't want their children remembered as something to be put down. So they disappeared. And years later, after storms, something still comes back to the fountain, like it remembers where water used to taste safe. Xicohténcatl said he heard the story from a man who sweeps the plaza himself. Not an official, not a leader, just someone who decided a long time ago that if the chillotes were going to come, they should come to a clean place. The man told him that the first time he heard them sing, he cried. Not because he was frightened, because it felt familiar, because the harmony sat in his body like a lullaby he didn't know he still carried. He told Xicohténcatl something I believe immediately because it's the kind of truth that doesn't need proof. I didn't know what they were saying, but I knew what they meant. And here's a small detail Xicohténcatl added, not as an explanation, just as a piece of the world that refuses to be tidy. A few blocks from the plaza, half buried in sand, there's a pre-war pump station with an old corporate stamp on the door. One of those public utility partnerships that used to be everywhere before the bombs. Inside were cracked tanks, dead filters, and a row of warning placards about contamination levels and maintenance schedules that never got completed. One placard lists a pre-war additive, a chemical meant to bind particulates after storms, a cheap attempt to keep groundwater within acceptable perimeters. The locals don't read placards for safety. They read them because it tells them the old world touched the water too, and the old world always leaves fingerprints. So maybe the fountain glows because of what the storm brings down. Maybe the chillotes drink it because their bodies crave whatever it does. Maybe the singing is just biology rewriting itself into something that sounds like music because that's the shape their nervous systems found. Or maybe it isn't that clean. Maybe some parts of being human don't vanish just because the body changes. Maybe melody survives longer than language. Maybe memory can get trapped in muscle and bone and breath. That's the part El Ojito seems to understand. They don't call the chillotes holy. They don't worship them. They don't chase them off either. They make space. They sweep the square. They quiet the children. They light candles the way you do when you don't have answers, but you still have respect. And after the storm, when the fountain begins to glow, they listen. Not because they want entertainment, because in a world that forgot how to be gentle, anything that arrives peacefully is worth meeting with the same. When you live long enough in the wasteland, you start listening to the same philosophy everywhere you go. No matter what language the signs are in, you learn that fear isn't the only tool that keeps you alive. Sometimes it's restraint. Sometimes it's choosing not to turn everything unknown into a target. Sometimes it's recognizing a ritual and letting it finish. So if you ever find yourself down in that Sonoran stretch, if you ever hear talk of El Ojito and a fountain that glows after storms, remember what the locals do. They don't reach for violence first. They reach for a broom. They make the world a little cleaner for something that they don't fully understand. And that might be the most human thing left. Thanks to Xicohténcatl for carrying this one north through the static. You've been listening to Midnight in the Wasteland. I'm Nightwatch. I'll be back tomorrow if the quiet stays kind. Until then, when the storm passes, don't assume the silence is empty. Sometimes the silence is the listening room, and sometimes it's a choir waiting for its cue.